September 14, 1944, 2:47 p.m., Camp Concordia, Kansas. Obergefreiter Klaus Zimmermann stood at the canteen window with 5 cents in his palm, watching American guards smoke Chesterfields that cost them nothing. Behind him, 300 German prisoners sat in their barracks, trading family heirlooms for single cigarettes. The mathematics made no sense. A pack cost prisoners 5 cents at the American PX. That same pack, smuggled across the Atlantic and into a German stalag, would buy a gold watch, 3 days' rations, or a man's silence about an escape tunnel. Klaus had done the calculations 17 times. The exchange rate was destroying his understanding of value itself. The war had created an economy that defied logic, and somewhere between the plains of Kansas and the ruins of Germany, the price of a cigarette had split into 2 different realities. Before we continue with Klaus's incredible story, we need your help to keep these forgotten heroes alive. If you're already hooked by what you're hearing, hit that like button right now. It tells YouTube to share this with more people who care about real history. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of courage and innovation from World War II. And here's something we love. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Your country, your city. We have viewers from Buenos Aires to Berlin, from Manila to Montreal. Are you a veteran? Did your grandfather serve? Do you have a connection to this war? We want to hear from you. Now back to Camp Concordia, Kansas, where Klaus Zimmermann was about to become an unlikely economist in the strangest marketplace the war would create. Klaus Zimmermann was 23 years old when he surrendered in Normandy, 3 weeks after D-Day. He came from Freiburg, a university town in southwestern Germany, where his father taught mathematics at the Albert Ludwigs Universität. Klaus had inherited his father's precision with numbers and his mother's practical skepticism about everything else. Before the war, he'd been studying accounting, learning to track the movement of money through ledgers and balance sheets. Now he tracked something stranger, the irrational price of comfort across 2 continents. He was 5'7", shorter than most of his comrades. With glasses he'd somehow kept intact through the Bocage fighting and the long surrender march. The other prisoners called him Professor, half mockery, half respect. He'd been conscripted in 1942, served reluctantly, and fought because the alternative was execution. When the Americans overran his position near Carentan, Klaus had his hands up before the shooting stopped. Camp Concordia sat on flat Kansas prairie, 200 miles from anything that mattered. Rows of tar paper barracks stretched across former farmland, surrounded by wire and guard towers that seemed almost apologetic. The Americans ran it by the Geneva Convention rulebook: 3 meals daily, medical care, male privileges, and access to a canteen where prisoners could spend the 80 cents per day they earned doing farm labor. The canteen sold cigarettes for 5 cents a pack, 20 cigarettes, 1 nickel. Klaus bought his first pack on August 3, 1944, 6 weeks after his capture. Lucky strike. Green package, red circle, the words LSMFT stamped on every cigarette. He'd been a light smoker before the war, but in Normandy he'd developed the habit properly, the way soldiers did, smoking to stay awake, smoking to calm nerves, smoking because everyone else was smoking, and it created a tiny community in the middle of chaos. He opened the pack in the barracks that evening. 22 men watched him do it. "How much?" asked Werner Koch, a former panzer grenadier from München, who'd lost 3 fingers to a grenade at St. Lo. 5 cents, Gunner Klaus said. "Bullshit. I bought it at the canteen, 5 cents American." Werner looked at the pack like it was a sacred object. "In Stalag FUB, 1 cigarette costs half a loaf of bread. Or a wedding ring," added Johann Becker from Köln, who'd traded his wife's gold band for 2 packs of Ecksteins in 1943 before his capture in Italy. Klaus distributed the cigarettes carefully, 1 per man, keeping 2 for himself. The mathematics bothered him immediately. If these cigarettes were worth what they'd been worth in German stalags, he was holding approximately 4,000 calories of bread value, or enough trade goods to bribe a guard for 3 days. Instead, he'd purchased them for the price of a Kansas newspaper. Something was broken in the economic system. Klaus wanted to understand what. Between August 1944 and January 1945, Klaus bought 73 packs of cigarettes from the Camp Concordia canteen. He smoked perhaps 40 cigarettes himself. The rest he watched circulate through the camp economy with the attention other men gave to pin-up girls or letters from home. He started keeping a ledger, recording every transaction he witnessed or heard about, building a map of cigarette commerce that stretched from Kansas to Germany. The numbers revealed an impossible contradiction. In America, prisoners earned 80 cents per day for labor. Cigarettes cost 5 cents per pack. A prisoner could buy 16 packs per day's wages. Most bought 2 or 3 packs weekly. The cigarettes were good. Lucky Strike, Chesterfield, Camel, Pall Mall. American tobacco, fresh, abundant. The camp canteen never ran out. Supply was effectively infinite. In Germany, those same cigarettes were rarer than morphine. Klaus learned this from letters, from new prisoners, from guards who'd served in Europe and told stories. A single American cigarette in a German Stalag could buy a full meal from a guard. A pack could buy a watch, a harmonica, a knife, permission to skip a work detail. 3 packs could buy false papers. 5 packs could buy silence about an escape attempt. The exchange rate was approximately 400 to 1. Klaus tried to explain this to Lieutenant Richter, the senior German officer in their compound, a career soldier from Potsdam who still wore his uniform jacket despite the Kansas heat. "It's simple supply and demand," Richter said, barely looking up from his book. "We have cigarettes, they don't. Economics." "But the disparity doesn't make sense, sir. The cost of production is the same." "The cost of shipping. Zimmermann, we're in prison camp. Nothing makes sense. Stop thinking like a student." But Klaus couldn't stop. The mathematics haunted him. He shared a bunk with Martin Vogel, a radio man from Hamburg who'd been captured at Cherbourg. Martin had a sister in Berlin, working in a munitions factory, and she wrote regularly, long letters that somehow made it past the censors, full of details about life in the bombed city. In October 1944, Martin received a letter that changed everything. "She wants cigarettes," Martin said, holding the letter like it might dissolve. "She says she can trade them for food. 1 American cigarette for a week's worth of bread rations." "How would you even send them?" Klaus asked. "Red Cross packages go both ways. If I could get cigarettes into a Red Cross parcel, the Americans inspect everything. Not everything. Not if you're clever." Martin Vogel wasn't clever enough. He tried to smuggle 2 packs of Chesterfields in a Red Cross box marked for Berlin, hiding them inside a hollowed-out book. The guards found them during routine inspection. Martin spent 10 days in solitary confinement, and when he came back he wouldn't talk about it. But his idea didn't die. Klaus began asking questions, quietly, carefully. He talked to prisoners who'd been in other camps, who knew other systems. He learned that Camp Concordia was unusually generous with canteen access, that other camps restricted cigarette sales or eliminated them entirely. He learned that some prisoners had established smuggling routes, not out of the camp but into it, bringing German cigarettes from home that somehow had more currency among prisoners than American ones, despite being inferior quality. The psychology was fascinating. Men valued what reminded them of home, even when the objective quality was lower. In November 1944, Klaus met Friedrich Adenauer, no relation to the politician, just an unfortunate name for a Berliner mechanic who'd fought in North Africa before his capture in Tunisia. Friedrich had spent 6 months at Camp Mexia in Texas before his transfer to Kansas, and he'd seen something Klaus hadn't, the full scope of the cigarette economy across multiple camps. "There are men who make fortunes," Friedrich said. They were sitting in the recreation hall playing chess with pieces carved from soap. Not German prisoners, American guards. They buy cigarettes at the PX for nothing, smuggle them back to Germany in care packages or through contacts, sell them for gold and watches and cash. I knew a sergeant in Texas who shipped home $4,000 in gold in 6 months. $4,000? Watches, rings, cigarettes going east, gold coming west. The exchange rate makes it possible. You buy for 5 cents, sell for $20. You do that 100 times, you're rich. Klaus felt something click into place. The war had created not just a supply problem, but an information problem. The price differential existed because the 2 economies couldn't communicate. German prisoners in Kansas didn't know what their cigarettes were worth in Berlin. Germans in Berlin didn't know cigarettes cost 5 cents in America. The gap in knowledge created the gap in price, and that gap was making some people wealthy, while others traded family heirlooms for tobacco. Could prisoners do it? Klaus asked. Could we arbitrage the differential? Friedrich laughed. How? We're behind wire. We can't smuggle anything anywhere. We're on the wrong side of the transaction, Professor. We're the supply, not the traders. But Klaus kept thinking. The real breakthrough came in December, when a new transport arrived from Europe. German prisoners who'd been held in British camps and were being transferred to American custody for labor purposes. Among them was Otto Schmidt, a former economics teacher from Frankfurt, who'd surrendered in France and spent 4 months in a camp outside London. Otto had seen the British system. British camps didn't sell cigarettes at canteens. Instead, they distributed them as part of weekly rations, 50 cigarettes per prisoner per week, free of charge. This created a completely different economy. Cigarettes became currency, literally. Prisoners traded them for everything: food, clothes, services, favors. Exchange rates emerged naturally. 1 cigarette for a chocolate bar, 3 cigarettes for a laundered shirt, 10 cigarettes for a haircut from the good barber. It was perfect, Otto said, self-regulating. The Red Cross provided supply, demand, determined price, and everyone knew the value of everything. What happened when someone wanted to save cigarettes? Klaus asked. To accumulate wealth. They started futures trading, as Otto said, grinning. I'm not joking. Men would trade promises of future cigarette rations. I'll give you my next week's cigarettes for your chocolate today. We had credit systems, debt collection, even bankruptcy proceedings. It was beautiful. Klaus understood immediately what this meant. The British system had created a functional economy because it gave cigarettes stable value. The American system created chaos because it made cigarettes simultaneously worthless in Kansas and priceless in Germany. The price differential wasn't an accident. It was structural. On January 8, 1945, Klaus received a letter from his father in Freiburg. The letter had taken 4 months to arrive, passing through Swiss intermediaries and Red Cross channels. His father wrote in careful, coded language. The censors read everything, but the message was clear. Freiburg was starving. Allied bombing had destroyed supply lines. The black market was the only market. A single American cigarette could buy a meal for 2 people. His father's university salary, once sufficient for middle-class comfort, now bought nothing. Inflation had destroyed the currency. Only physical goods had value, and cigarettes were the most valuable goods of all. If you have access to cigarettes, when his father wrote, they are worth more than money here, worth more than almost anything. Klaus read the letter 4 times. Then he did mathematics. If he spent his entire labor earnings on cigarettes, 16 packs daily, 480 packs monthly, and if he could somehow transport those cigarettes to Germany, and if he could sell them at even a fraction of their German black market value, the wealth transfer would be enormous, life-saving for his family, potentially transformative. But the if was impossible. Prisoners couldn't ship packages to Germany. The Red Cross didn't work that direction. American authorities wouldn't allow it. The war was still being fought. Communication with Germany was restricted, monitored, forbidden. Unless. Klaus spent 3 days thinking about the problem from every angle. The solution, when it came, was obvious. He couldn't exploit the price differential himself, but he could explain it to someone who could. He wrote a letter to his father. Not a family letter. Those were limited, censored, useless for what he needed. Instead, he wrote a technical paper disguised as a chatty update about camp life. He described the canteen prices in casual detail. He mentioned the abundance of American cigarettes, the low cost, the easy availability. He wrote as if making conversation, but every sentence contained precise economic data. He knew his father would understand. A mathematics professor would see the numbers and recognize the arbitrage opportunity immediately. The letter went out through Red Cross channels on January 15, 1945. Klaus had no idea if it would arrive or what his father could do with the information if it did. But he'd identified the problem, calculated the solution, and transmitted the data. That was all an economist could do. What Klaus didn't know What he couldn't know, sitting behind wire in Kansas, was that his letter would never reach his father. Allied bombing destroyed the Swiss routing center where it was being processed. The letter burned in a warehouse fire in Geneva on February 3, 1945, along with 11,000 other pieces of POW mail. But the economic system Klaus had identified was already being exploited by others. American guards at Camp Concordia and dozens of other POW camps across the United States had recognized the cigarette differential years before Klaus arrived. They'd been running an informal smuggling operation since 1943, buying cigarettes at military PX prices and shipping them to contacts in Europe, sometimes to family members in the Allied armies, sometimes to black market operators, sometimes to humanitarian organizations that distributed them in German POW camps. The profits were substantial. A sergeant could buy cartons of cigarettes for 50 cents, 10 packs, 200 cigarettes. Those same cigarettes, sold individually in a German Stalag, could fetch $20 or more in trade goods. Even accounting for shipping costs, risk and middlemen, the return was exponential. Staff Sergeant Robert McCready from Philadelphia ran the largest operation at Camp Concordia. He'd been doing it since the camp opened in 1943, shipping cigarettes home to his brother, who had contacts in the merchant marine. The brother would get the cigarettes to Europe, sometimes through military channels, sometimes through civilian black markets. The goods would come back as cash, watches, jewelry, fine leather goods, things that held value. McCready was making $600 monthly, on top of his military salary. He had $7,000 saved by December 1944. He planned to buy a house after the war. Klaus didn't learn about any of this until after the war ended. In the camp he only saw fragments, guards who seemed unusually friendly to certain prisoners, packages that went uninspected, men who accumulated small luxuries that made no sense given their official incomes. The cigarette economy continued through the spring of 1945, accelerating as the European war approached its end. Camp Concordia received more prisoners, new transports from the final German collapses in France and Belgium and Germany itself. Each new arrival brought stories about the black market, about starvation, about the insane value of American goods. Klaus kept his ledger. By March 1945, he'd documented 417 cigarette transactions, creating a detailed economic portrait of POW camp commerce. He recorded prices, exchange rates, currency equivalents. He noted that a single Hershey bar, available at the canteen for 5 cents, could trade for 3 cigarettes among German prisoners who craved sugar. Those 3 cigarettes in Germany could buy 12 Hershey bars worth of calories in black market food. The circular absurdity of it made him want to laugh and cry simultaneously. On April 11, 1945, Klaus received his last letter from Germany. Not from his father, from his mother. The letter was brief, factual, devastating. His father had been killed in an air raid on March 21st. The university had been bombed. 14 professors died. His father's office took a direct hit. His mother was alive, living with neighbors because their house was destroyed. She was surviving on Red Cross rations and black market purchases. She desperately needed cigarettes, she wrote, not to smoke, to trade. 1 cigarette could buy a loaf of bread. 10 cigarettes could buy safety from looters. She didn't know how to get cigarettes. She didn't know if Klaus could help. She just wanted him to know his father was dead. Klaus sat in the barracks and held the letter and understood that all his calculations had been for nothing. The price differential was real. The arbitrage opportunity was real. The wealth transfer was real. But none of it mattered because he was behind wire in Kansas, and his father was dead in Freiburg, and his mother was starving, and he had access to infinite cigarettes that might as well be on Mars for all the good they did her. The war ended 3 weeks later. By May 1945, Camp Concordia held over 3,000 German prisoners. The surrender in Europe didn't mean immediate release. Prisoners would remain in American custody for months, sometimes years, while authorities processed repatriation. Klaus stayed in Kansas until February 1946, 9 months after Germany's collapse. During those months, the cigarette economy transformed again. With the war over, restrictions eased. The Red Cross established proper channels for prisoner packages to Germany. American authorities permitted limited civilian shipping. The mail system normalized. The price differential began to close as cigarettes flowed more freely between continents. But it never closed completely. Even in late 1945, American cigarettes in Germany retained extraordinary value. The German economy was shattered. Currency was worthless. Cigarettes remained the most reliable medium of exchange, more trusted than Reichsmarks, more liquid than gold. Klaus finally managed to send cigarettes to his mother in November 1945. He bought 10 packs, 50 cents of his labor earnings, and shipped them through the restored Red Cross system. The package took 6 weeks to arrive. His mother wrote back in January. The cigarettes had saved her life. She'd traded them for food, for fuel, for bribes to get better housing. One pack had bought her a winter coat. Another had secured a job referral from a local official. 10 packs, 50 cents. The difference between survival and starvation. Klaus returned to Germany in February 1946, processed through a repatriation center in France, loaded onto a train, and deposited in Freiburg with $40 American and a certificate of discharge from POW status. The city was rubble. The university was being rebuilt. His mother was living in 2 rooms of a partially destroyed apartment building. He found work as a clerk for the American occupation authorities, helping process financial records for German businesses being assessed for reparations. The job paid in American cigarettes, part of the occupation currency system. He earned 200 cigarettes monthly, which he could trade for whatever he needed or use to buy Reichsmarks at favorable rates. The cigarette economy persisted until 1948, when the Deutschmark currency reform finally stabilized German finances and created a reliable medium of exchange again. Cigarettes remained valuable, but they stopped being money. The price differential collapsed. The arbitrage opportunity ended. Klaus kept his wartime ledger in a desk drawer. He never showed it to anyone. After the currency reform, he went back to university, finished his interrupted accounting degree and found work with a textile company in Stuttgart. He married in 1951, had 3 children, worked for 42 years in corporate accounting, and retired in 1988 with a modest pension. He never smoked again after 1948. The smell reminded him of Kansas. In 1993, a graduate student at the University of Frankfurt was researching POW camp economies for a doctoral dissertation. She found references to Camp Concordia in American military archives, including a curious mention of extensive prisoner economic activity in a 1945 Inspector General's report. Following the thread, she discovered Klaus's name in a list of prisoners who'd worked in camp administration. She wrote to him. Klaus was 72 years old, living in a small apartment in Stuttgart, widowed, retired, spending his days reading newspapers and visiting his grandchildren. He responded to her letter with a 40-page document, his complete camp ledger, transcribed and annotated. The graduate student published her dissertation in 1995. It included an entire chapter on the cigarette economy at Camp Concordia, based primarily on Klaus's records. The dissertation won a prize from the German Historical Association. Klaus attended the award ceremony. Nobody asked him to speak. He sat in the audience and watched a young scholar explain the economic principles he'd discovered 50 years earlier, behind wire on the Kansas prairie. The dissertation's central finding, the price differential for cigarettes between American POW camps and Germany, created one of the most dramatic arbitrage opportunities in modern economic history, with exchange rates reaching 500, one at peak. The differential persisted because of information asymmetry, transportation costs, and political restrictions on cross-border commerce. Conservative estimates suggest that American guards and civilian operators extracted between $5 and $15 million in wealth from the German economy through cigarette smuggling between 1943 and 1948. None of that money went to German prisoners. They were on the wrong side of the transaction. Klaus Zimmermann died in Stuttgart on August 12, 1997, aged 76. His obituary in the Stuttgarter Zeitung mentioned his career in textile accounting and his 3 children. It didn't mention the war or Kansas or the economics of cigarettes in captivity. His grandchildren found the ledger when clearing out his apartment. They didn't understand what it was, pages of numbers, dates, prices, calculations in his precise handwriting. They donated it to the University of Frankfurt, where it sits now in the Special Collections Archive. Researchers use it occasionally. It's one of the most detailed primary source documents about POW camp economics ever created. Klaus recorded not just prices but context, not just transactions but motivations. He captured an entire shadow economy that operated in the margins of the war, where the price of a cigarette could mean everything or nothing depending on which side of the Atlantic you stood. The ledger's final entry, dated January 30th, 1946, 6 days before Klaus's repatriation. Bought 2 packs Lucky Strike, 10 cents total. Will carry home to mother. Calculate value in Freiburg, approximately 2 weeks' food. Bought in Kansas, 2 minutes' wages. The mathematics still make no sense. Perhaps they never did. If this story moved you, if it revealed something about the hidden economics of war that you'd never considered, we need your help to keep these forgotten histories alive. Hit that like button. It tells YouTube that detailed, research-based history matters. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss another story of the invisible systems that shaped World War II, and tell us in the comments. Did your family experience black market economies during the war? Did your grandfather or grandmother tell stories about cigarettes as currency? We want to hear your connection to this history. These stories matter because they show how ordinary people navigated extraordinary circumstances with nothing but observation and adaptation. Thank you for keeping Klaus Zimmermann's meticulous records from fading into silence.